Good evening. Welcome to Politics Tonight. I'm WGN-TV political analyst Paul Lisnick. That's our nightly look at politics around our city, state, and nation. We begin tonight in New York, where in a sweeping speech to the United Nations, President Donald Trump made it clear to the world he intends to put America first. Karen Kaifa is at the UN with more on that fiery address.
To invite him.
In a wide-ranging debut to the United Nations, President Donald Trump delivered a doomsday warning to North Korea.
The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
Directly putting the country's leader on notice, Trump suggested Kim Jong-un could not survive an American attack.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
It was a characteristically bombastic approach to a crisis that's growing in scale. Throughout his address, the most closely watched foreign policy remarks of his presidency, Trump brought frank assessments to a range of sticky global flashpoints, including the Iran nuclear deal.
The Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into. Frankly, that deal is an embarrassment to the United States, and I don't think you've heard the last of it, believe me.
The president also made it clear that there's nothing wrong with nations acting in their own interests.
As President of the United States, I will always put America first, just like you, as the leaders of your countries, will always and should always put your countries first.
At the United Nations, I'm Karen Kaifa.
Karen, thank you. A lot to dissect there. North Korean delegation walking out, by the way. Joining me on the phone to talk about the president's debut at the United Nations, St. Xavier professor Robert Shapiro. Professor, welcome back to Politics Tonight. I want to start with some of the language that we heard. You know, the phrases like calling Kim Jong-un Rocket Man, and some of these phrases very Trumpian in design. My question for you is, presidents don't usually talk that way. Stephen Miller played a huge role in writing this speech. Clearly it had the president's imprint on it. What was your reaction, or do you think the delegates' reaction, to hearing that kind of language today, atypical for a president?
Well, my first reaction was I remembered that everybody thought that if Trump were elected that he would tone things down and become more statesmanlike as a president, and that proved to be, I think, a faulty assumption. And I think people thought he would go in front of the United Nations, this really august international body, and tone things down, and we still have the same Trump. I think what you see is what you get with President Trump, and he just always is the same. I think that this is not language that the delegates are used to hearing. I think he knew that. I think some of that was somewhat calculated, but I think that he is just going to be who he is and not going to change no matter what the audience.
When it came to North Korea, he said, we will have no choice but to completely destroy North Korea if the UN efforts don't work. He also said denuclearization is the only option here, almost as though saying, UN, we're going to give you a shot, but we're prepared to completely destroy North Korea. Now, he didn't say nuclear attack. I don't know how else you completely destroy a country. Once again, unusual for a president or anybody to go to that level, draw what seems to be another red line.
Yes, I mean, what struck me about this is that it seemed to be a replay of what he had done with the Chinese that had been so unsuccessful, or has been unsuccessful up to now. I think that his thought was originally that he would ratchet up the rhetoric with a lot of this blustery and very warlike talk, and that would cause the Chinese to react differently. And the Chinese are always take a measured approach to things, and I think they sort of were wondering and waiting to see what it is he would do, if anything, which up to now is not anything. And I think that he's now trying to use that same approach with the UN. I'm afraid it's likely to be just as unsuccessful. And so the question is, what does he have in mind? He did hedge it a little bit by saying that if the allies were threatened in any way, that would be the result. But I think this is a little bit of, as I said, saying something very extreme to see whether he can, bully people into doing something, and I'm not sure it's going to work.
You understand the state of the world. I'm just curious. He's obviously poking the bear a little bit by saying what he said about Kim Jong-un, North Korea. Does this put off Kim Jong-un? We said, as I mentioned, the delegation walked out, North Korean delegation. Or do we wake up within a period of time and see more rockets going off because this just gets Kim Jong-un even more aggressive?
Well, I think that one of the things that Kim Jong-un is doing is testing this. You know, he keeps sending off these rockets to see what the reaction is going to be. So far, all the reaction has been just further talk and further threats. And I think he's looking to see just how far he can push the envelope. Oh. And I think that he's a very careful, calculating guy, no matter how crazy we tend to think of him. He's got a pretty good idea of what it is he's doing.
He talked about not wanting to, you know, spread our values all over the world. We don't want more territory. Again, it's America first. And yet, he gave a warning to Venezuela, basically saying Maduro doesn't clean up his act. We're going there to help our friends and neighbors. Yes. Cuba. But he mentioned all these countries, and I thought, like, to me, there was a disparity between take care of yourselves, America's going to take care of itself, and at the same time, be prepared. We may be coming for you.
Yeah, President Trump's speeches are never marked by their consistency, I will say. And on the one hand, he said everybody's entitled to their own system, and on the other hand, he said that we're not going to tolerate certain kinds of socialism that deprive people of human rights. And there is a marked inconsistency between that, and it was made specific in the case of both Cuba and Venezuela. It was very striking. You know, you never quite know which direction he intends to go in, and I'm not sure that the policy is all that clearly laid out in his own mind, even as we speak.
I had one specific for you. He talked about wiping out radical Islamic terrorism. We will stop it. Terrorists are losers. But he named them off: Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, Hezbollah, Hamas. He never said ISIS. I would say it was just an oversight, except this was a drafted speech on a teleprompter. Did you notice that, react to that? Am I just being oversensitive?
Well, it's hard to know what to make of that. I mean, it may be that he preferred to name the ones that were going to reassure various of our allies. There was a lot in there mentioning Hezbollah and Hamas that was designed to reassure and to gain plaudits from the Israelis, who obviously like the speech quite a bit. So it may be more in the positive than in the negative. It was kind of striking that he left that out. But maybe he believes that the end game there has already come upon us and that these others are things that we had to focus on more.
So much to talk about. Professor Robert Shapiro from St. Xavier University. As always, my friend, appreciate your time. We'll see you soon.
Oh, I appreciate it, Paul.
Thank
you. Good evening.
You too. Coming up next, more on the president's debut at the United Nations. Plus,